attending tonight. We're just waiting for Maraj. He's just changing his kurta. It'll be a few minutes. Thank you. Okay, Jay. So, Hare
Okay.
Krishna Raj, thank you so much for giving your precious time to talk to us about Sankirtan. We're really grateful to hear from someone like yourself who's been serving Prabhupada for over 57 years now. So, yeah, thank you for giving a chance to hear from you. We'll go through some questions and then we'll open it to the floor of devotees if they would like to inquire further. So, our first question is, how did you first come in contact with Srila Prabhupada's books in Krishna consciousness?
Well, in 1968, I first came in contact, well, in 1966, I first came in contact, or 65, I can't remember, with Srila Prabhupada. When I read in the East Village Udder about, I saw a picture of Prabhupada on the cover, and
Mm,
they talked about the Swami who came to America. I knew nothing about Krishna consciousness. The only time I ever saw a lady in a sari was when I was 10 years old, and they took us to a trip to the United Nations. Other than that, I had
mm,
no contact with India.
mm.
Uh, but my friend in 1968, he, at the beginning of 68, January 68, he introduced me to the Hare Krishna mantra. That's when I learned how to chant Hare Krishna. I don't think he knew what it meant, and I didn't know what it meant, but we were chanting Hare Krishna together. And then in 1960, around March of 68, I was a student at the University of Buffalo in New York, and I went home to visit my parents who lived in Brooklyn, New York. And in the same building that my parents lived, I had some friends, and they were living at 26 Second Avenue. And I asked them about what it was like to live there, because I had no idea what the whole thing was about. And they said, well, we woke up at 5 o'clock in the morning and we began to dance. So I thought maybe they had become moon worshippers.
Right.
So later on that, in May of 1968, actually right in the middle of May, I was walking down the street one day. Well, I was living outside the university. I wasn't in the dorm. I had my own apartment. And I
Mm,
decided I'd go to the park in Buffalo because Buffalo doesn't really have a park, Buffalo, New York. It's an industrial town. They manufacture steel there, at least when I was a student. And I decided to go to the park because it was the nicest place. It wasn't actually a park, it was a cemetery. That was the nicest place in Buffalo. So you can imagine what the rest of the place was like. So I was walking to the park, and on the way there, it was around 5 or 6 blocks away. I'm sorry, a cemetery, actually. I consider it a park now. My whole consciousness changed just automatically. Now, this is 1968. We might assume that I was taking drugs or something, but I, I had I had taken some drug, but I it had nothing to do with drugs. I had never taken LSD. I only had, when I was 10 years old, I had my father gave me a glass of beer to drink
right.
at a baseball game. That was as close as I got to. And I mean, I didn't have a life of intoxication, that's for sure.
Mhm.
In any case, I was walking to the cemetery, and suddenly my whole consciousness changed. All the buildings appeared to be like pastels, that they came out of a fairy tale. And I walked to the park, and I looked at the park at the cemetery actually, and there was a bridge there, and I saw all the different stones, and I thought, wow, this is pretty unlimited. And then I looked at the sky, and I thought, well, everything is quite unlimited. Even when I was younger, I sometimes thought like that, but it wasn't so vivid and real. And I look in the sky and I say, wow, all these stars there, someone must have made it. It didn't come here by accident. But now I was actually having some other experience and another state of consciousness. And then I realized that everything here came from someone or something, and that the goal of my
Mm,
life was to find out what that was. And although I had been really too serious a student at the university, but now I realize that actually the university had taught me nothing about this at all,
Mm.
and that I had no idea what I was experiencing, but I should find out. So that week I became a vegetarian, and I
Wow.
started to study the Bible and different types of Indian literature, whatever I can get my hands on. Paul Brunton, something. I'd been to India. And then I took up yoga, what was available. Vishnu Devananda had a book out. So I was starting to do yoga 8 hours. When I wasn't in college, I was either working as a model for an art studio doing yoga poses, or I was doing yoga poses. So then one of my friends I met who had dropped out of the university in our freshman year, I met him one day. And said I was looking for a Buddhist temple because I had no idea Hare Krishna, Buddhism, whatever, looking for
Mm.
something that would give me some assistance in higher consciousness. So
Yes.
then he told me about they had opened this little preaching center in a few blocks away from the university, and that I could go down there. His name was Jeffrey Hickey.
Mm.
He had just found out about Krishna consciousness like a couple of months before. So I went down there. He later on became initiated as Jagadish, and he became a Maharaj also, and a GBC and a
Mm.
sannyasi.
Mm.
So I went down there, and it was a little railroad shack. It wasn't. It was a preaching center. Uh,
Mhm.
the first floor was sunken in; it was collapsed, and then there was a little altar, something like an altar. Actually, there were some deities on a bookshelf, which I could. One was black, one was yellow, the other one was white. I had no idea who they were, this was all about. And then on the second floor was two rooms for where one can, quote, an ashram. In any case, I went
Mm.
there. I sat down. A big cockroach crawled across my leg. I said, "Wow, what am I doing here?" But I stayed, and I heard about Krishna consciousness, the chanting. So I said, "Well, it's probably not the same as doing yoga, but I'll try it out anyhow." So then I just
Mm.
started by chanting 25 rounds a day to start with. And I go up to the university periodically when a devotee named Rupanuga was giving class, and 3 times a week at the university. And I was reading so many books, I was always challenging him about Krishna consciousness, and I thought he had better answers than I did. So, and then a devotee named Burjan, who was the first to get initiated, he was giving class also a couple of times a week at the university, and I was usually the only person who attended the class. And he'd read one. He had there was no Bhagavad Gita to read. There was
Mm.
no. All he had was one verse, but he didn't have by Dr. Radha Krishna from his translation of the Bhagavad Gita, and he didn't even have the Sanskrit. He didn't have the purport. All he had was the verse. As the embodied soul continually passes in this body from boyhood to youth to old age, so similarly the soul passes to another body at the time of death. The self-realized souls are not bewildered by such a change. So I heard that usually 2 or 3 times a week, and I thought there must be more to the philosophy. But anyhow, that's what we had at the time. The only books that we had was Srila Prabhupada's Srimad Bhagavatams, which were quite not easy to read, the English. And the first class I attended, Ashvatthama threw a Brahmastra at Arjuna, and Arjuna counteracted it with another Brahmastra, and the whole universe was about to be destroyed. And then Krishna told Arjuna to withdraw both Brahmastras. So I thought, well, this is an interesting philosophy. In any case, I was chanting, and eventually, Krishna gave me some realizations that as long as I kept on chanting, then I was all right. And as soon as I stopped chanting, then I was in some other space called Maya. At that time, I decided I better move into the temple, quote, temple. And I moved into the temple. At that time, Burjan was moving to another, opening another center in a university in North Carolina. So he left. And as soon as I joined, moved into the temple, they made me the treasurer and the head pujari. But unfortunately, when Burjan was there, because I was going to the temple regularly, I asked him who those deities were. And although he says something different, but as far as I remember, he said he didn't know either. Otherwise, I would have found out who I was the head pujari with. In any case, before he left, he had actually built an altar for them, and I was the head pujari. I didn't, head pujari meant that we did what Prabhupada did was bells. To offer the food, we'd sit on the floor and we'd wave an incense stick at the deities and chant certain mantras. And that was our deity worship. Then I found out from when Prabhupada came to Buffalo in 1969, I believe it was April 69, I asked Prabhupada who the deities were. And he told me I knew they were called Lord Jagannath, but I didn't know what it meant. He said, that's Krishna. So I was quite relieved that I was worshiping Krishna. And Brother Prabhupada thought for a second, and he said they have this big festival every year in Jagannath Puri. It's called Rath Yatra. And he was just about to tell me that you don't have to worry about that. And I saw he was talking to someone internally, and he said, "Don't. That's all right." And that year we had Rath Yatra in Buffalo, so I understood that Lord Krishna told him that he knew Krishna, Lord Jagannath or Krishna knew that we were going to have a Rath Yatra for him. So Krishna probably didn't have to tell us; we didn't have to worry about it.
Wow.
In any case, in terms of book distribution, I was the treasurer, and the only income we had, well, we didn't have any. It was Rupanuga was collecting money. It was a social worker, so we got part of his income because he was married and he had a child. So that's how we maintained the temple. So the summer came. I was at the university, and he came to me, and he said that you have to get a job. Now, the last thing I was thinking about when I joined the Hare Krishna movement was to get a job.
Right.
Especially, I mean, I had the only other jobs I had, I worked as a runner on Wall Street. My uncle was a broker, so I got jobs in the summer. I worked as in different jobs for the summer sometimes, but that was voluntary before I became a devotee. So when my temple president told me to get a job, everyone had to work. Jagadish had a job. He had a job riding a taxi. Unfortunately, he got into the taxi one day and rammed into another car. That was his end of his taxi driving. So I read one letter because there were not so many letters circulating at that time because there are only, a few dozen devotees in the movement at that time, maybe 4 or 5 dozen devotees. So I read one letter that Prabhupada had written to Tamal Krishna Maharaj about his book, his about Back to Godhead distribution in Los Angeles, how he was very pleased that they were going out and distributing Back to Godheads and chanting on the street. And that somewhere or another he mentioned that they were making enough money to support the temple by doing that. So I said, well, that's great. We should try that. So then I got the devotees, which meant at that time there was a devotee named Bhakta Bill and his wife Irina and Jagadish and a devotee named, I forget his name, but he was initiated, but later he became Trivikram Swami. And we went out and we chanted Hare Krishna on the street.
Mm.
Actually, Trivikram was there. He had gone to England to join with Prabhupada. And
Mm.
Bhakta Bill, later on, he became Bhagavan Das, and Irina came Krishna Bhamidi. And I went out with a conch shell, because I think maybe that's how they did it in Los Angeles. And I just went up to people while the devotees were chanting and asked people to give a donation. And I remember the first person that gave me a dollar, I was just like overwhelmed, because the dollar was a lot more than it is now at that time. My
Mm.
allowance when I was younger was a dollar and a quarter per week. So a dollar was that was the minimum wage. People would they worked an hour to just get a dollar. So we went out. I collected that day. Another devotee came out with me, Kanupriya, got initiated as Kanupriya. We came back and we collected $27. So I said, "That's it. Now we've collected enough money. We can maintain the temple like that. I don't have to get a job."
Yeah.
So after that, the next week was Allentown Arts Festival. So we went out and we were chanting, and I went with my conch shell, and I decided that become more austere, I go out barefoot. So I collected the whole weekend with a conch shell, and Bhagavan was chanting, and Jagadish was chanting, and I was collecting, and it came back. I collected one day, I collected $200. The next day, I collected $300. So I said,
Wow.
wow. I mean, that was like collecting, you know, $1,000 each day. I mean, I was living on $50 for a month, practically speaking, when I was a
Mm.
student.
Mm.
And then we went out, the devotees went out 8 hours a day after that. And we chanted, half the devotees would chant Hare Krishna on the street, would do Harinam, and the other half would go out and collect donations and sell back to Godheads. So we did that the whole year. Even it went down to sometimes in Buffalo, I guess it would Fahrenheit, centigrade, it would get down to like 20 or 30 degrees below centigrade on really cold days. And
Mm.
that wouldn't be so difficult except for the fact that when we moved into the temple, we gave up our karmi clothes, quote, karmi, our karmi clothes, and we only had dhotis. And we gave up our karmi shoes, and we only had bath tongs. So that was a little austere going out in the tongs. I hope we had socks. I don't remember. And then we went out with our dhotis. I don't even remember having, I guess we had a coat. I can't remember. But we gave that all in when we joined. I mean, I was a head pujari, so I didn't go out as much as everyone else did. But when they told me to go back on Sankirtan, because I wasn't such a good head pujari, I remember going out one day and distributing book back to Godheads and chanting the whole day. And I was back in the car, the van, to take us back. We didn't get anything to eat by the way. We had breakfast and then we had the whole day chanting and then they brought out one thermos of dal for us. And then I remember coming back in the vehicle and my hand was frozen, so I thought I had frostbite, which I probably did. But luckily it unfroze after some time, so I can still move it. So that went on for some time. I mean, I was the only one who really, because I was pretty aggressive personality, and so
Mm.
I was naturally an aggressive salesperson. So I pressured people to buy back to Godhead and give the 50 cents. And more or less we supported our temple like that.
Wow.
There was no, we weren't taught any particular technique or whatever. So I used my own technique of running little old ladies down and getting them to give 50 cents. It wasn't
Mm.
so sophisticated.
Mm.
Later on, Prabhupada asked me, my temple president wanted me to get married. I wasn't really into it, but when he convinced me that if you get married, first of all, you can become a leader in our movement because all the leaders were married at the time. And second, he said that she'll cook a feast for everyone. So I thought, well, Prashadam, we're eating so poorly here. If we could get a feast, one feast might be worth it. So I didn't really know what I was getting into. So
Mm.
anyhow, she cooked the feast and it was terrible. That wasn't a good start. And I read Bhagavad, as soon as we got together, I read Bhagavad Gita to her, and she fell asleep. So that was even a worse start. Later on, I found that she wanted romance, and I did that wasn't part of my agenda. So she left.
Mm. Mm.
But in the meantime, Rupanuga had asked Srila Prabhupada if I should get married or not to this lady. I didn't find out what her name was. Wasn't exactly the most intimate connection I ever had with anyone. But I have to look up in the database. Her name was pretty strange. Jagatana something. Jagatanani or something. Jagatanani. So anyhow, she left, but Prabhupada wrote back. She said, "I'm very happy that Prahladananda is getting married. They should open a center somewhere." So
Mm.
Rupanuga Prabhu decided I should open a center, although I never was really married. It only lasted a couple of weeks. So he sent me down to Coconut Grove, Florida, to open a center there. So I thought, at least I'm going to become a temple president. So I was sent down there, and at that time, there were sannyasis there, and had been asked to leave the movement. They wound up in Coconut Grove, Florida. There was Brahmananda Maharaj at that time, Gargamuni Maharaj, Vishnujan Maharaj, and Subal Maharaj. And I
Mm.
got there, and I had no idea where they were. I found out where they were. They were living in a bookstore. That was just temporarily for the night. Somehow, and we had a glass of milk, and I thought it was not so bad. And then I found out the next morning they were all leaving, except for Gargamuni and myself and Gopinath, who was his assistant, and that we were going to live in the park, literally live in the park in a sleeping bag on the dusty grounds of the park, bathe in the park sink, and cook in the park grill with all the karmis. But we cooked earlier than they did. And we chanted our rounds, and we cooked, Gopinath and myself cooked chapatis on the grill, and Gargamuni cooked apple chutney. We had a little kirtan, the hippies would come. We put the apple chutney in the chapatis, and Gargamuni would give a short talk, and then Gopinath and myself would distribute the chapatis with the apple chutney in it. And after we were done, we were allowed our quota for the day, our meal for the whole day. We got two chapatis with a little apple chutney in it because Gargamuni did not like to spend money. So I mean, I was in the movement for a couple of years, but we had no idea our mission was to spread Krishna consciousness, and whatever came, came. We had no history
Mm.
of this is
Mm.
bad or this is good. We just accepted whatever came.
Mm.
And so then the rest of the day we go out and book distribution. I would distribute back to Godheads, and I was fairly good at it, but Coconut Grove wasn't the busiest place in the world to distribute, back to Godheads. We collected something. We came back by 6 o'clock. Then we were allowed to buy extra prasadam, which when we came back on time, that would be 2 bananas and a quarter of a pint of sour cream for the rest of the day. So I went like that for some time, some weeks. I didn't realize I was getting pretty thin. After a while, you're not hungry anymore because you don't notice it.
Mm.
You do look forward to the two chapatis with a little, a little bit of apple chutney. And then the hurricane season came, which was, when I was younger, we used to go to Florida every year. My mother and my parent and my sister, we used to go to Florida. So I always thought of Florida like a warm place and a nice place to be. So I was happy to be signed to open a temple there. But then the hurricane season started. I think it was November or something. And that was a little austere because we'd be cooking in the park and there was a hurricane going on. So we were getting soaking wet and the wind was blowing and we were cooking chapatis in the park. Uh,
Oh,
Somehow or another, Krishna arranged it and it's cold too, even in Florida at that time. So the
Mm.
Krishna arranged the next day that someone offered us that we could sleep in their car. That was a relief from the hurricane season. But then they told me I should hitchhike to join Vishnu John Maharaj and Srinath would hitchhike. That was around 2,000, around 2.5, 3,000 kilometers to go to Texas through the deep south at that time. And that was an adventure itself, especially Gargamuni agreed to buy me something along the way when I hitchhiked there. He bought me 1/4 of a pound of fried chickpeas to take. Usually it's a 3 or 4 day trip. And so I
Wow.
was, then the man who was running the health food store looked at me. For some reason, he gave me 2 free date bowls. So that's what I took on my journey. I wasn't really into the fried chickpeas. I mean, they didn't look very good to me, so I kept them with me. And then I guess to make a long story short, I just hitchhiked for 4 days, 3 or 4 days to get to Houston. It was quite an adventure. The first person picked me up was completely intoxicated, and he took me to the other side of Florida. The next was a lady. He finally picked me up. I had to accept whatever rides because we were all dressed as dhotis and tilak and shaven head. The people had no idea where we came from.
Right.
And a lady picked me up, so I had to take the ride. And she said, "Don't." I said, "I'm sorry, I can't, get a ride from a woman." She said, "Don't worry, I won't hurt you." So I took the ride, and she let me stay at her house overnight. Then I started the next day, and it was raining, and no one would pick me up. So I got a ride with someone going the opposite direction back to Florida just to get out of the rain. So that delayed my voyage a little bit. Finally, after a couple of days, a few days, I got to Louisiana, and the police picked me up, and they actually it was in Alabama. They picked me up. I have a history with Alabama, and the police asked me. They asked me why I was wearing a dress. So I explained to them something. They had arrested Vishnu John Maharaj and Srinath before I journeyed there, and they put them in jail for some time and then let them go. But they let me go.
Mm.
And finally, I got to Houston, and I didn't know where they were. I tried to call up my GBC at that time, and he wouldn't accept to collect call, and I had no money, so that took a while to find. And then finally, he accepted to collect call, and I found out where Vishnu John Maharaj and Srinath were. And so I got there. It was a garage apartment, and they handed me a stack of chapatis because it was lunchtime. There was like 5 chapatis. So I thought we were supposed to
Mm.
divide it up amongst ourselves because I hadn't seen more than 5 chapatis. I hadn't eaten more than 2 chapatis, sometimes 3. We could find the remnants of the hippies after they left. They told me I could eat all the 5 chapatis, so I said, "Wow, this is pretty good." But then the question was how we were going to collect money to buy the chapatis. So I was the only one who knew how to distribute books. And we went out the first day in Houston and we did Harinam, and we were going to do some book distribution. The police immediately came and arrested us, took took us to jail. I remember us chanting, and the policeman came up to me and said, "Stop chanting." So I thought he was in Maya. I should keep on chanting to get him out of Maya. And then he took out his gun. He was going to hit me with his gun. So I thought maybe it would be a good idea not to chant a little more softly. In any case, we were on trial before the city council. It was such a big thing. They put us on trial on television with Vishnu John Maharaj representing us as the guilty, as the accused. So we were going to be tried before the city council for distributing without a permit literature on the streets of Houston, Texas. And one
Sorry,
man came,
Maharaj.
what's that?
Maharaj, the audio has just disappeared.
Did he come back now?
No, I'm still kind
Can anyone hear me? Most devotees can hear me.
I can hear you fine, Maharaj.
Okay, now we're good, Maharaj. Thank you. Please
Okay.
continue. Thank you.
So I hope I'm not going too fast for Livangalata. I've told her I was going to go slower. So I'll slow down a little bit. Sorry, Livangalata Mataji.
Sorry, my apologies. Okay, Maharaj. Sorry,
Well,
please
that's
continue.
good. Now I can slow down a little. So at that time, one man came up to a reporter. He didn't know he was a reporter, and told the reporter he'd give him $50 if he would hit
Okay.
the monk on television. So the reporter went before, what's that? What was that? Can everyone hear me? Still hear me? Yeah. So the reporter went before the city council and told the city council that he was offered $50 to hit the monk on television. So the city council was so embarrassed, they dismissed our case. And so now Vishnu Jan Maharaj, myself, Srinath and myself could distribute books. But Vishnu Jan Maharaj didn't have a clue how to distribute books at all. He'd just stand there he wouldn't say a thing, just with the Back to Godhead open, because that was the only book we had, and wouldn't say a word at anyone. So his score was quite low every day. And I was trying to distribute books in Houston, Texas, and they were called what's called rednecks. They thought we were from an outer planet. They had never seen a species of life like we were at that time. So the only technique I could use was just to pray to Krishna. It's the only thing that worked. And then Krishna would send someone and ask me what I had in my hand, because any other technique didn't work at that time.
Mm.
In any case, later on, we finally we learned how to distribute books in downtown Houston. And then I was transferred to I went to become the temple president of Dallas, Texas. And we went out on book distribution there. And
Mm.
the first time we went on book distribution, we all got arrested because we were going door to door. And they charged us with impersonating women because we had dhotis on. So we were in jail over the weekend. And then the woman came to testify who had accused us of impersonating women. She recognized our outfit, but she couldn't see our faces because it was nighttime. So the judge dismissed it. In any case, we had quite an experience of distributing in Texas at that time. Uh, After some time, I was going out. We had a small temple, uh, but the whole temple was completely dedicated to book distribution. That's all we did all day.
Mm.
Sometimes we were the top small temple in the world for book distribution.
Mm.
In any case, there's so many stories about that. But later on, I discovered I could distribute big books, and I was distributing big books, and we were doing Krishna books. We At night and during the day, I would distribute books on the what's called the drag to the students at the drag. So that went on until, one day my friend Vishnu Jan Maharaj, who had joined with Tamakrishna Maharaj in the Radha Damodar party, he came by and I was asking him because I had given away some of our men to different temples, and then our landlord came and he wasn't expecting, he had rented our building. This was in Austin, Texas. He had rented our building to a professor at the university, and now he had discovered that there were like 8 devotees living there at this particular building. And
Mm.
he was quite disturbed by it, and he told us we had to all get out. So that was an experience. In any case, we couldn't find accommodation for all the devotees, so we were left with a few devotees, but we just went on book distribution all day long.
Mm.
And then Radha, I was looking to get some devotees because we couldn't make devotees and distribute books at the same time. So Vishnu Jan Maharaj came by with his Radha Damodar bus, and I asked him if he could help us out and give us some devotees to help us in our temple. And he said, well, actually, that we're not going to give you any devotees. We're going to take you for Radha Damodar. That was kind of like the mood, how they. So then I joined the Radha Damodar party. They got somehow or another, they got permission from Prabhupada to close our center, and I joined Radha Damodar. And then because I was a full-time book distributor anyhow. And when I wasn't distributing books, I was, either we did our sadhana or I was cooking. I also was a cook at that time. So I spent some years on Radha Damodar, and that meant either at the beginning I was the Sankirtana leader for the Radha Damodar bus, and whatever case, whoever you were doing, meant 12 hours a day distributing books usually. I remember coming back to be on the bus sometimes, and the bus could only hold so many devotees. So sometimes we had to sleep on the hub, where the wheel is. There would be some metal covering the wheel on the bus. So sometimes I have to sleep on that. I remember sleeping on the roof of our van one time because everyone was asleep when I came back later. But my sleeping bag got stuck because it froze to the roof of the truck of our van. And so when I tried to take it off, it ripped. In any case, it was quite an experience. I mean, we distributed quite a bit of books at that time. Radha Damodar was the topmost book distributors in the world at that time. And sometimes I had my own party, and I'd drop off the devotees on the party, under the party, and then I'd come back, and I'd have to make my quota. And I had, I think, the second highest, or the highest quota on Radha Damodar, so that was quite intense. But when Chaitanya Charitamrita came out, I dropped everyone off, and I couldn't avoid reading Chaitanya Charitamrita, the volumes if they came out. And then I was reading Chaitanya Charitamrita, and so in a very small amount of time, I had to have to collect my quota. And I remember one time I was distributing books, and these were, this was Chaitanya Charitamrita we were distributing. They were hardcover books, so. And then no one would take a book. So I went back to the van, and I thought, well, maybe I better read Chaitanya Charitamrita, because I don't seem to know what I'm doing out here right now. So then I read, and I couldn't understand a word it said, because my mind was so bewildered. So then I read it a few times, I read it again and again, and finally it said that everyone is Krishna's eternal servant, and our job is to go out there and give them information about Krishna. So I said, wow, that makes sense. So then I went out really enthusiastic, and everyone took a book.
Wow.
So that was nice. I remember one time I was told that I should try to find out. One time when I was the temple president of Dallas, because I was the temple president there twice, Austin once, Houston twice. My first one, I was the temple president. My devotee who had replaced me as the temple president of Houston, I switched places with him, decided he was going to become the regional secretary for Texas. So he came back to replace me as the temple president. So I was the temple president, but I was also a book distributor as the treasurer, etc. So I said, okay, no problem. So then I was the treasurer, and he was the temple president now. But he spent money like anything. And it was practically impossible for me to keep up with his expenses. He make long distance telephone calls every day. For what reason, I had no idea. In any case, we had a team of brahmacharis distributing books, and I was the Sankirtana leader, but they all got married, and I was the only one left. But I was also the treasurer, so I had this responsibility of collecting the money and also paying the bills. And I had a temple president who wasn't very cooperative. So I was getting a little disturbed, especially Dallas was not the best place in the world, most receptive place in the world to distribute books at that time. In any case, I decided, in spite of my mind, I go out and distribute books. because I felt I was obligated to do it. So I took the bus down to downtown Dallas, and when I got there, the whole downtown Dallas turned into Vaikuntha, and everyone there looked like they had come from Vaikuntha. I had no idea what was happening, but anyhow, everyone practically I approached took a book with a big smile and gave me a nice donation. Until very quickly I distributed all the Back to God heads I had. And then as soon as I did that, I was back in downtown Dallas. And my realization was I had no idea what Dallas was. All I had was my imagination, what I thought it was, and that Krishna could transform it at any moment into was actually something closer to reality.
Mm.
I've had experience also when they asked me one time, the BBT asked me to try to open an airport when I was the temple president of Austin. And I was a full-time book distributor. But I didn't like to go into illegal spots because I had the experience when I was first a book distributor in Buffalo, or even, I guess it was, yeah, maybe it was Buffalo or other places like Houston. We go out to the parking lots with a dhoti on and tilak and a shaven head. It wasn't legal. And there were always police driving around in carts looking for people, policing the grounds. And it wasn't very good if they found us. So in a dhoti and tilak and a shaven head, we'd have to hide behind the lamppost not to get caught. In any case, they asked me to open this airport, which is illegal. I said, all right. I wasn't really happy about it, but I thought I'll just rely upon Krishna. And as soon as I got to the airport, my whole consciousness changed. I was in a completely different world. I didn't know how it happened. And everyone I approached, I mean, I felt so empowered, so determined, so full of Shakti that everyone I approached, I didn't have to say anything practically. They just looked at me, took out their wallets, took the book and gave a donation. So that went on until I distributed the books. And then I was back in San Antonio. This is San Antonio, Texas, the airport, a small airport.
Mm.
They never utilized that airport. It was too small. But anyhow, it gave me quite an experience. The only other time I had such an experience was during a marathon when I was the temple president of a place called Newark, Delaware, and I was doing the marathon. And at that time, there was to be on the top of the Sankirtana list was you had to distribute. I was usually, when I was in Chicago, I was distributing with a devotee named Pragosh, uh, Tripurari Maharaj, devotee named Vaishasika Prabhu. So we were all competing with each other. So I was distributing like every day I distributed 60 high-bound books. So usually I was in the top of the 20 of the world in Tripurari and Pragosh. Vaishasika was always ahead of me. Anyhow, they were more emphasizing Lakshmi at that time, collecting hundreds of dollars. Our techniques weren't so clean at that time either. In any case, I was at the Temple Presence in Philadelphia, and I was distributing books at the airport for the marathon. And I made a determination because to be a fairly good distributor at that time, or a good distributor, or a great one, you had to distribute 100 big books a day. So I made a determination I was going to distribute at least 100 big books a day. To do that, of course, we had to do two at a time. It wasn't practical especially in an airport, try to do 100 books a day. You get completely. This was a huge airport, Philadelphia. It took like 20 minutes to go from one side to the next, and we had to constantly move because the planes were coming in at different times. In any case, I did the whole marathon, and I was averaging around 120 big books a day. And I was getting completely exhausted. but I decided to go out anyhow. So this is like, the 20th December, I could hardly move. But somehow or another, Krishna made the arrangement. Again, I just went up to people, showed them the book, and they immediately take out their wallet and give me a donation. So then I realized that, I was actually not the doer and that Krishna was distributing the books. So I did the marathon up to Christmas, and I averaged 120 big books a day or something like that. Didn't make the top 10 or something in the world, but I was, at the end, I was realizing how Krishna was completely the doer and I had nothing to do with it. Practically, I was just doing it, had the desire to be. So that was when I joined Radha Damodar, that was my experience also, that I had a quota. I think I had 100, at that time I was making $150 a day, which was, this was in 75, 76, and I was distributing, first we were doing Back to Godheads and big books, etc. on Radha Damodar. But then Chicago, that's when we were doing the airports, and that was much more, we could distribute a lot more books. And then finally, after Radha Damodar more or less disappeared, and I went to Peru, where I became the regional secretary or something like that as a sannyasi. I go on book distribution there, but that was I remember one time going on in Bolivia, I went on the whole day on a bus distributing books, and I got something like 3 million pesos, Bolivian pesos. And when we cashed it in, it was something like $5 US. So we have to remember, I mean, I had no income. Sannyasis at that time were not considered to be, especially in South America. I mean, it wasn't a very lucrative business being a sannyasi at that time. Usually it never is. So when I had to make all the Lakshmi, because I was like the regional secretary for a number of countries. So I had to make my entire living, my maintenance in a month in America, which I usually was able to do, to go and distribute books in America, and I collect there. And I continue on doing book distribution in South America and in America, distributing the airports. And then I wound up in the Philippines. I would go out when I was in the Philippines. There was a lady named Purna Chandrapru and myself would go out every day. Poor country. We go out the whole day distributing at the university and collect around $5 a day, the whole day. In any case, I kept on doing book distribution over the years, whether it was a poor country or a rich country, wherever it was. I remember when I was in America, when we were distributing books in Chicago. I mean, this is when Chicago was the biggest book distributors in the world at that time. Tripurari, Maharaj, Pragosh, Naikatma, Vaishasika. I was in I wound up somewhere in there, but not like they were. But our airport was really disturbed. The airport authorities were really disturbed with us because we were literally collecting sometimes hundreds of dollars from people, especially the service people, in ways which were the workers there would watch us. They make like in a month, they may make a few $100s, and they were getting from the servicemen sometimes $300 at a time for a book. So they're getting really envious of it. But we didn't really care because there was some idea that the war is coming soon and that we better get all the books and collect all the money we can. So then there was this ding, 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 ding at the airport. Every 5 minutes, the airport authorities would make an announcement. Attention, attention. You may be approached by people who are distributing a book to you. Please be advised, they're not authorized by the airport or by the airport authorities. And all day long that went on. And when people would ask you, what's that about? We said, well, that's just an announcement advertising our books. People didn't really know. So the book distribution wasn't really hampered. Well, when the airport authorities saw it wasn't working, I mean, then they tried another thing. They got clickers. They got the airlines to distribute clickers to people. And when they arrived at the airport, if they saw someone distributing a book, they'd surround us and click, 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 click. I mean, people volunteered to do that. And we distributed the books, and someone would ask, well, what's this all about? Why are they surrounding you? Clicking. Well, they're clicking so you could take a book. So they actually helped us distribute more books. I thought this was a bona fide activity. People are surrounding us, encouraging us to take the books. So we distributed more books than before. So the airport got completely frustrated with us. And they decided that they make us illegal. So they took us to court. And finally, they won a court battle that allowed us only to stand in a certain area and a table. And we couldn't sell the book. We only could sell the book at the table. We could move beyond the table, but we couldn't sell the book to the table. So we developed a technique. We had the books, we had the table, and we had some books at the table, and we go out to people. We give them a book, tell them, come over to the table and we'll put it in a bag for you. So we bring them over to the table, put them in the bag, staple the bag, and then ask them for a donation. So we were doing actually better because they thought, well, these people are part of the airport.
Right.
They have a table here at the airport. They're a bona fide organization. So we're doing better. So then the airport got completely frustrated, the airport authorities, and they actually sent out thugs to actually attack us while we were distributing the books. So at that point, we realized we better go somewhere else, which we did. We went downtown and started to distribute books to the locals. Anyhow, there's a lot more to say. I distribute books in different places in different times. I think in practically every country in the world. I distribute books at international airports where I learned all different languages at the airports just enough to converse with them, to get them to sell a book, to buy a book, even languages. But anyhow, we did that. I learned Dai Tai Hitapiti wa Skochi Kivana Gashamas and Ni Hao Tokideshka Subalisi, all different lines. I knew French at that time. Amazingly enough, I hardly ever distributed, although I spoke fluent French, I could hardly distribute books in French. My main customers were usually from the Arabian countries. I spoke enough Arabic to distribute the books to them. For instance, I used lines like no, that's konnichiwa. Actually, I even forgot my Arabic lines. Anyhow, I go through that. How do you say hello in Arabic?
Does anyone know on the call?
What's that?
Does anyone know Arabic on the call?
Anyhow, Ahlan,
Salam alaikum.
Alhamdulillah. I go through my whole, and then
Alhamdulillah.
they look at me and they'd say, "Well, you don't look Arabic." And then I'd say, "Well, it's a fact. I'm only half Arabic. That no one's perfect." And they'd laugh, and then they take a book, and I'd say, "Give me some flus." Flus is the slang for money. So then they thought I was part of the club. So that practically most of them took a book, and they gave nice donations because they had a lot of money. So I learned how to deal with different cultures, Swedish, the Bolivians, the ones from Brazil were really the sweetest. The ones
Mm.
also from Ireland, they always had a red nose, so because they're always intoxicated. So I know I knew who they were, and I talked to them. I use the slang from uh, from from Ireland, how she cut me, whatever. So they always took a book and they always gave a nice donation. So I learned all the different cultures and how to distribute books to them.
Mm.
In any case, somehow or another, I wound up in different places at different times and learning different languages. And at least we got this technique, which was really good for, we have all the lines in 50 different languages written in a book, on paper. And then we go to the airport. It didn't matter what country they came from. Usually the 50 countries were covered. And I say, where are you from?
Mm.
They say, I'm from, you know, I speak Swahili and I'm from so. So they said, okay. So I said, I'm learning Swahili. Can you help me? And I opened the Swahili section with with the Swahili. It said, I'm a monk. We're distributing these books for the welfare of humanity. Could you please, take a book and give this monk a donation? So I said, can you help me out and read this for me? So then they read it for me, and then I read it with them, and they say, well, can you help out? And that way I was able to distribute to many different cultures and countries. But ultimately, just to just because we don't have that much time. One thing I found out was that everything depended upon our desire.
Mm.
When I was trying to collect, when the biggest collector in Chicago was collecting 500 or 600 or $700 a day at that time in this early in the middle of the 70s, and I was trying to keep up with them. I remember watching some of them distribute books, and I was thinking within my mind, don't I was praying to Krishna, don't let the person take the book because then I'm going to lose the competition. And I thought, well, this is really Maya. So I tried to correct myself. But then, although I was a little envious, but then because I had intense desire to distribute a book. And right afterwards, I felt this intense desire. Then Krishna would just send someone to take a book and give a donation.
Mm.
So that was one of my lessons. It didn't really matter so much my expertise. What mattered the most was my desire to distribute the books. And if I had a
Mm.
pure desire, I wanted to do it for some Krishna conscious reason, then Krishna would reciprocate whatever the circumstances were in
Mm.
whatever way he wanted. But I'd actually see that Krishna was reciprocating with me according to my
Mm.
desire, whether it was pure or not. But I could see that the super soul was the main factor and I was secondary. Anyhow, that's just
Mm.
talking very fast and a little bit of my experience.
Wow. Thank you for sharing such an amazing history of a whole life dedicated to Sankirtan. It's so inspiring and so many austerities you've undergone. But one question I had,
Uh,
Miraj, is how, through all of the different experiences and circumstances you've been in while serving Srila Prabhupada, how have you maintained such a strong inspiration and determination to distribute the books amidst all your other services and
well, the last
circumstances?
marathon I was on in December, one of my disciples told me to go and distribute some books. So I took the books, and everyone I went to, I just saw I was an instrument for Krishna. It had nothing to do with me.
Mm.
And they weren't Slovenes; they were from all different parts of Italy, but they all took books. In like a half
Mm.
an hour, an hour, distributed like 35 or 40 books. So then I realized that, I'm just an instrument for Krishna. Whatever I'm doing, I'm an instrument. But book distribution is the quickest way to realizing that we're not the doer. So that's quite helpful if you're trying to become liberated and Krishna conscious, since our goal is to become liberated from the material concepts of life. There's no experiences I've had practically. I've had other experiences, but those were automatic, not automatic, but the most direct way of realizing, coming closer to reality, Krishna consciousness, forcing one to do that. Otherwise, it could be very painful being on book distribution. I remember being in an airport one time during a marathon. This was the LAX airport. And I went out for the marathon. And one day, well, at the international airport, and although I could, somehow or another that day, there were like a few thousand Asians coming by at a time. And when Asians come by, they all follow each other. So for an hour, I was standing there trying to stop one of them. And the most frustrating thing was that they didn't acknowledge I even existed, what to speak of even stopping. So then I had to wait for an hour or so for the thousand to pass by. And then the last person I hit up, who wasn't aware of the fact that the other thousand had rejected me, finally took a book. So this is Krishna's lesson. I realized it was Krishna's teaching us that we can't be attached to the results, and we do the best we can and try to do it for Krishna, try to give up our material desires and try to do something for the Sankirtana movement. And Krishna will reciprocate. Whatever is happening, good or bad, we're going to learn some lesson, and that will help us. Just one more story. When I was in Dallas, and I would come to Dallas sometimes. I would during the uh, I wasn't living in Dallas, but I was doing some book distribution there, and I decided there was a big fair called the uh, the Texas State Fair, and there was a big statue called Big Tex, and he would sell all day. He'd say, "The Hare Krishnas are here at the Texas State Fair distributing books. Don't buy anything from them." In any case, people didn't listen to Big Tex, couldn't understand anyhow. So I decided one day I was going to go out there and I was going to tell people exactly what's in the book and see what would happen. So I went out there for an hour and told people exactly what I thought was in the books, Prabhupada's books, and I distributed 0 books during that time. And then I went out there again. I decided I'd use my usual lines, and I'd say, "Excuse me," whatever I say, and then, "I'm a monk. Do you know what a monk is?" And they go, "No." I say, I'm not a punk. I'm not a skunk. I'm a monk." We shave our heads, whatever. And then I ask him how many, where are you from? Wow, that's a nice place. And I met a lot of nice people from there. What kind of work you do? Wow, that's really good. Are you good at it? And then, how many kids you have? Wow, you got a good family. Just my usual lines, just make friends with people and then ask for a donation. And, people took books and they gave donations. So I realized this idea that I had to be fully direct with people didn't work. Didn't help me, it didn't help them. But sometimes we have to be a little bit more indirect, make friends with people first of all, and then ask for the donations after you give them the book. I remember I used to go in the airport, I used to go up to ladies, a mother and a daughter, hand them both a book, and I'd say, "Excuse me, girls, are you both sisters?" And usually the mother would go, "Oh, you're just flattering me." And then she goes, "Well, that's right, I'll give you a donation anyhow." Or if Vaishya Prabhu's line, you knock on a door, door to door, and he goes, and they answer, you go, "Excuse me, do you live here?" Just to get a yes from them. And then you said yes. That was the thing. Uh, just get a lot of yes. What kind, are you a good student? Yes. Do you live around here? Yes. Do you like music? Yes. Would you like to give a donation? Okay, yes. Get them positive as possible. And then ask for ask for donation. Yes, 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 yes. Yes.
Maharaj, what would you say is the best mood or prayer to have while we're on Sankirtan?
My dear Lord, please send someone to take the book and give a donation.
Mm.
I mean, we should, if we have a vision of what we're doing there, I mean, we can have, I mean, I collected quite a bit of Lakshmi by just having a quota, and every time someone gave a donation, I just deducted from my quota. So by the end of the day, I had a real intense desire to do my quota, and Krishna would just usually send me the people who would make up for whatever I was lacking in the quota.
Mm.
Faith in Krishna, the super soul. But also to know the mission, to know that we're there to serve Srila Prabhupada. As Prabhupada wrote to me one time, he said, the more you work seriously, this is 1969, he wrote to me, I think, 69 or 70. The more you work seriously to help bring Lord Krishna's other children back to the spiritual kingdom, then the more he'll bestow all his blessings upon you. That Krishna is never ungrateful for our efforts to serve him, rest assured. So I think that's the best meditation.
Mm. Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing. I just thought, Maharaj, do you have a little more time for other devotees to ask some questions, or do you
Yeah, a
need
few
to
minutes more.
a few minutes? So maybe just now, if any other devotees have a question, you can unmute yourself and ask anything about what Maharaj has touched on. Otherwise, I have some questions that devotees have sent in previously. Would
I have
anyone
a
like to?
question, Maharaj. I have a
Okay,
question,
yes,
Maharaj. Thank you for your class. You speak about having a quota and also Lakshmi collected. In ISKCON, we have quite a culture of keeping book scores and keeping tally. So that can increase the book distribution, but it can also sometimes seem to tinge it with impure motives and anxiety and result focus. So how to balance the two is my question.
Well, I think you'll naturally balance in the course of time. After you win a few marathons, and I remember when I was a student at the university, I would get straight A's sometimes with a lot of anxiety and a lot of effort. And then the next semester I had to start all over again. But after a while I was really getting tired of getting burnt out by working so hard to get straight A's. So similarly, to win a marathon, whatever, or to be competing, after a while you get tired of it and you start thinking maybe there's another consciousness I should. But I should just keep on doing the books. I mean, probably didn't seem to care very much in one sense what our consciousness was. He had faith that if we did this for Krishna and we did it sincerely, then whatever impurities we may have may disappear. Now, a problem is, I remember I was distributing books with I think he was the second biggest book distributor in the world at that time. He was a nice, I won't mention his name, but he was a very good looking devotee, and we were in a very small airport, Charlotte, North Carolina. And his technique was he dressed very nicely and he stopped the most beautiful, gorgeous women he could find, nicely dressed, looked very wealthy. And he'd stop them. And I watched him, his technique. It looked like Romeo had finally met Juliet at the airport. And he generally always succeeded in getting them to, take the book and give a really good donation. So that went on for some time. We were there for some months doing a marathon also. And I didn't want to duplicate. I didn't really want to duplicate his technique, nor could I really do it. I didn't really feel inspired by it. In any case, one day he met Juliet, and that was the end of his his book distribution.
Huh.
So that we have to avoid. I mean, I've watched devotees who were the biggest book distributors in the world. I mean, they're literally the biggest, hundreds of books every day. But, they had other ideas about why they were doing it. And others who were distributing less, but, they steadily did it for decades and decades. And others did, big books like Navina Narada. He distributed hundreds of books a day sometimes, and he's still doing it. So we have to keep Krishna consciousness, keep our consciousness in Krishna. And even if there's some other desires like trying to compete with the other devotees, probably didn't think it was a big thing. But I was counting down the Lakshmi because that's my nature. That's what I was the treasurer, so I was a treasurer sometimes. So I just naturally did it. It wasn't something artificial. It was just part of my nature. And it worked. I mean, day after day, I saw it work, so I didn't think it was a bad idea doing it. And I got the books out, and I got the Lakshmi collected. Anything else? I mean, the whole book distribution is really quite mystical. I remember one devotee, we couldn't get him out on book distribution. He was always afraid that if he went out on book distribution, someone might attack him. So finally, the authorities made him go out on book distribution one day. And the first person he approached took his fist and slammed it into his face and knocked him out. So Krishna fulfilled his desire. He was meditating in fear for years of going on a book distribution. He might get attacked. So that's what he was expecting. And Krishna fulfilled his desire. On the other hand, if we have another consciousness, then Krishna will fulfill that desire too. So that should be our meditation. What does Krishna want me to do? And how does he want me to do it? How does he want me to desire it? What does he want me to desire? Why? Why am I out here?
I think we have one more question, Maharaj, if that's okay with you.
Okay, sure.
Hare Krishna,
Okay.
Maharaj. Oh,
Hare
thank you.
Krishna.
I heard you were mentioning that you had a very intense desire to distribute, and that's what Krishna would reciprocate with. And I was wondering, what would you say is the biggest thing that we can do to increase our desire?
Well, one thing is we can do what we're asked to do by the authorities. I mean, there was nothing, I didn't inject anything in myself to increase that desire that day, where people would just reach into their pockets and give me money and take the book without even my saying anything. I mean, but that's because I did something I didn't want to do, but I did it because they asked me to do it. And I knew there's a bigger cause behind it. So that was my experience. Be a good servant, do what the authorities want you to do. It's for a good cause, and Krishna will reciprocate.
Thank you.
And just keep on doing it. I mean, we have to understand, most of the time when I'd go out, I didn't really feel like going out unless I was, especially if I didn't do it every day, 8 hours a day, because then you get into we can consider it a groove, whatever. But sometimes I go out, I didn't feel like going out. But you go out and you stay there and you tolerate, and after a while someone takes a book, and then another person takes a book, and then you start feeling confident and inspired, and whatever, and then you think you're actually controlling people, and then Krishna takes it all away. Your back is, praying to Krishna, help.
Jay, thank you.
Anything? So we'll stop there. Thank you very much. Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Samaveda Bhaktivinoda ki jai, Sankirtana Yagya ki jai, Prabhupada's Marathon ki jai, Gaur Premanande, Hari Bol.
Hare Hare Bol. His Holiness Prahladananda Maharaj ki jai. Thank you so much.
Jai, Hare Krishna.
Thank you for your precious time. Hare Krishna.